The families of those killed during apartheid, many of them are still looking for answers. Convicted murderer Louis van Schoor died recently, told the BBC that the police gave him instructions to carry out killings. Let's bring in Isa-Lee Jacobson. She's the filmmaker responsible for the documentary The Apartheid Killer, and she joins us this afternoon. Isa-Lee, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much. And I, in fact, just watched the documentary this morning. It is both devastating, heartbreaking, and hopeful at the same time.
Yes, thanks so much, Michelle, and thanks so much for having me. I just want to correct something. Van Schoor never said he was given instruction. I think basically what we refer to in the documentary is the fact that his cases and his killings were called justifiable homicide. So that meant that at the time the police would arrive on the scene, he was often the only witness, and they would rule it justifiable homicide, which meant that there had to have been police who were arriving on the scene and not doing their job at the time.
Thank you for that, and apologies for that. But yeah, and no you problem. Say this at the start of the documentary as well. The system that was set up at the time, the system that was meant to adjudicate and police and bring accountability to what Van Schoor did, was a system that effectively enabled him.
Correct. That's exactly the right way to frame it. Yeah.
So you know, Issa, you were quite. I want to perhaps begin at the end, and you at the end of the documentary talk about wanting to, in a sense, confront him. I took some notes this morning, and you said you wanted to try and extract some truth, some humanity from Van Schoor. And I watched you, and I saw you struggle with that interaction. Was that an incredibly difficult confrontation to have with him when it didn't come with the end result that you were looking for?
I think at that stage I wasn't expecting an actual end result, but it was incredibly difficult because it's very hard when you're confronting somebody who just has no remorse and no empathy. And has no willingness to look at what they have done and just say, you know, come up with any kind of reaction that makes one resonate on a human level. And that was incredibly hard to confront in terms of my interaction with Van Schoor. You know, we wanted to have, I'm speaking for Charlie Northcote from the BBC and myself, in that room at that time. I think we were hoping to get more clarity so that we could go to other victims and survivors and family members and say, this is what happened. But it was a closed door. And in the end, you know, there is just a person who just doesn't think they've done anything wrong. Yeah,
in fact, he says as much, right? He says, in that clip that we just played in the background to you talking, he says he was a crime fighter. He says, quote unquote, I have no remorse. People might be looking for me to issue an apology, and I'm just not going to do that.
Yeah, and he stays firm on that all the way through.
Isa-Lee, what attracted you to telling this particular horror of our apartheid legacy in South Africa?
You know, one of the things that the BBC asked me to do was to find the victims and survivors and family members of Van Schoor's killings and shootings. And, you know, when I started to find people, that's what propelled me and compelled me to continue. Because what one realizes is that people don't recover. They don't just recover 35 years later. There are the wounds are engraved, and there are ramifications. And that speaks volumes to this country and the amount of killings and shootings and trauma that exists in this country and that exists on an intergenerational level in this country, and how we actually really need to speak to people who know what happened during those years And that's a broad range of people. And, it's my fundamental belief that those people need to come forward in a new way beyond the TRC, which, largely didn't follow out on a lot of Tutu's recommendations, to have those people come forward and say, this is what I know happened. And this is the kind of piece I can give to family members.
Right. And as you also say in the documentary, and I mean, it's evidenced in the fact that Van Schoor has just died. The time for getting that kind of closure for so many hundreds, thousands of family is running out, because the perpetrators, the people who know the true story, the people who are willing to speak, that they are dying.
It's exactly right, Michelle. And I think that this journey for me over the last 4 years demonstrated that, and demonstrated the urgency, just like Van Schoor dying last week has demonstrated how time is running out.
Yeah. You talk about the trauma of families who have left behind, the families of those killed under the apartheid government, black men and boys and black women. And I think of Edward Sones's son, who you spoke to in this documentary, and his own journey through alcohol and drugs, and he talks about multiple stabbings that he had been involved in. This 41-year-old man who was 6 years old at the time when Van Schoor killed his father, who still talking about the memories of a father who was present and loving, broke down and cried.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I mean about these wounds running deep. And that you don't just get over it. I mean, there's this whole rhetoric in this country, isn't there, around, just get over it, can't we move on now? Well, no, actually no. We have to confront the sins of the past in order to heal, in order to move on. And that's what there needs to be a whole new process of doing that. And that means, making people accountable who should have been accountable many, many years ago.
And I just, talk about this notion in South Africa that we need to move on, and what's in the past is in the past. There's also this notion of a race card, right? As if there's a race card. We are a country that is so incredibly good at moving on, so to say, in the moment. If you think about COVID-19 and how the world has sort of bounced back from COVID-19, South Africa has a particular ability to forgive and forget, perhaps on the world stage. But that's not true for families, is it, Isa-Lee?
No, and I mean, I think we are extraordinarily resourceful, but it comes at a cost. And that means we leave behind the people who have been brutalized in a way that just on a fundamental level isn't right, because there should be some form of compensation and acknowledgement at the very, very least. And you look at the kind of, what people endured during apartheid, the fact that people who lived through forced removals are struggling to even claim back their properties. I mean, all of these things are traumatizing and carry through to the next generation. I had a screening on Sunday night in Cape Town, and my moderator said that she has grown up with she's 23 years old, and she said she's grown up with an anger that she never really understood, and I think that really resonated for me. I think we have to start having conversations, and that means on across many generations. Yeah,
but on the other side of things, you had this conversation trying to appeal to the humanity of someone who killed countless people. Very few of the murders are actually recognized, perhaps half. You'll maybe give me the correct percentage that you think of, but he killed, in his words, some 40-odd black men and boys. He was, and you put this to him, he was a serial killer, and yet he was living as a free man at the time of his death, and that is true for so many apartheid killers who are living as if nothing ever happened.
And that's what this includes my BBC partner, Charlie Northcott, and as well as the original investigators who were in East London in the 80s. we're all asking, how could he have been let free when there should have been family members consulted in his parole process? So, it's a larger question. There's the issues around compensation, the issues around an investigation and a trial that happened in 92 where, the family members were treated at best as witnesses. Survivors were treated at best as witnesses, not as people who had survived a terrible traumatic event. And that the podcast is going to really bring to the fore when those episodes come out in the coming weeks.
There's an incredibly moving and painful and all of those incredibly complex human emotions insofar as grief and trauma are concerned, where Edward Sones's remains are dug up and he is taken home, and his sister and his son are there, and it's as if he had just died, right? Do we have enough of a focus in our country of giving families that kind of closure when we are able to? Is there enough of a recognition of just how important the homecoming of someone's remains is for those who died under apartheid?
Absolutely not. Just what we had to go through to have Edward's remains exhumed was massive. I mean, what doesn't come across is the bureaucratic process, and I'm very grateful to Buffalo City Cemeteries, and particularly Mr. Krupp, who guided us through the process, the amount of work that Marlene Soenies did to gather the information, to fill out the forms. And it's brutal, right? I mean, you're having to, these are the forms you need to fill out for your family member. Nobody is helping you to do this. Nobody is acknowledging that just writing an affidavit asking for these remains to be exhumed is in and of itself traumatic. But that's an entirely kind of, so that people are not cushioned and are not helped and are not guided and are not helped financially either to go through this process.
Yeah, just yet another phase of the inhumanity with which they were treated under the apartheid government. Isa-Lee Jacobson, it's a great pleasure talking to you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully your documentary, The Apartheid Killer, opens up a whole new conversation about what should be our focus.